bumped off the call, please go back to the initial link in your login. I'd like to also recognize our other staff members from RMED. I have Amma Anadozi, she is our admin coordinator. Fumiola Abiola Odutola is our marketing communication manager. And Eric Forrester is my sidekick on the western half of the province. And Eric is also an economic development advisor. Now, I'd like to say a few words about our guest today, Kaitlyn Hebert of Inc. Consulting. She is a certified information privacy professional. Kaitlyn brings an understanding of the Canadian industry and the underlying applicable law that governs personal information management. The title for today's webinar is Breaking the AI Barriers, Practical AI Application for Rural Economic Development. Artificial intelligence is transforming industries, but many rural communities and businesses hesitate to adopt it due to uncertainties, privacy concerns, and regulatory complexities. The webinar will explore how AI can enhance productivity, streamline operations, and drive economic growth in rural Manitoba. Additionally, we will discuss how freedom of information and privacy laws are evolving to address the risk and opportunities AI present for municipalities and private enterprise. Gaining insight, you need to confidently embrace AI and leverage its potential for the community. Kaitlyn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jana. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. And it is, of course, a presentation, but you're all here, you're active participants, and I welcome your questions, comments, and we'll definitely try to get to everyone in today's session. So I've got a lot of information to cover, and I'm just going to screen share. Cannot multitask, one moment. And yeah, so we've got a lot to cover. Some things I might gloss over. I definitely welcome you reaching out after the fact. I'll let you know where you can find me. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn and as well through our channels. And if you want to reach out to RMED, I have no problem with you sharing my email address if you have any specific questions about your application of AI for your municipality specifically. Yeah, and so without further ado, we'll kind of get into it. And as the description mentioned, we're going to cover a variety of topics. So we're going to really demystify the concept of artificial intelligence for those that are still in the infant stages of learning, kind of break down what it is, how it works, and help you understand how you might be able to apply it. So in order to do that, because I'm of course a consultant in privacy, we look at risk management, and we're looking at what are the requirements in today's jurisdictions and today's kind of ecosystem around AI compliance, and how can we use that information to help inform how we're going to use it and be risk manage the AI application as well. And looking at privacy laws is one of those ways to help sort of root our decision making. And then we'll get into a bit of the fun stuff and really kind of starting to talk about how to apply AI to enhance that value to your citizens or your customer experience, really driving that economic value. And then hopefully by the end, you'll get inspired by some ways that you can use technologies, think about how it might drive your productivity for your municipality. Of course, we only have a finite amount of resources and a finite amount of time. And so ideally, AI can help foster that. And so hopefully you walk away today with a bit of that knowledge. I do know we were going to do a pre-poll. Did we want to start that now, or is that okay?
Thanks for the reminder, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, no problem. I just remembered myself, so can certainly pause.
So we have a pre-poll for everyone. What specific AI trends and innovations do you think would have the most significant impact on municipal development and public service delivery in the coming years? And the second question, what are the primary challenges municipalities face when considering the implementation of AI solutions and how can they prepare to overcome these hurdles?
All of the above is the other answer there. Yeah. Everyone got their answer, and it looks like. Great. Yeah, no, this is really fascinating. Thanks for sharing, everyone, your thoughts on this. Did we want to break it down a little bit, or do you want me to comment, or how do you
I think some of these things will be answered in your presentation, probably, Kaitlyn. So
Definitely.
yeah,
Just a set? Okay, great. So now
thanks for
everyone kind
sharing.
of knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's helpful for everyone to know where everyone else sort of sits as well, and know that you're not alone. And definitely that the data privacy and security concerns, will be covering that, management of the change. Of course, technology can be intimidating, so hopefully some of your knowledge will help demystify that. And yeah, and of course, how do you overcome some of those limited technical skills as well? Great. It looks like infrastructure and funding is not a big issue, and perhaps that's because there's initiatives, funding these elements, understanding the value of them. So that's great to see. Awesome. So yeah, I kick things off here by just really sharing this house diagram that we've created here at Inc. to really bring home the idea of the fact that AI, or your AI program, is now one of those components that's going to help you move forward your overall data strategy, and that's really supported by your data governance. So when we talk about data governance as a whole, we're looking at a few different components. What was once traditionally privacy and just security, now we're looking at AI, because there's new risks that come along with AI use, and how that will impact your overall data use as well. So, kind of trending in terms of where that maturity scale has rated over time. Many of you are likely familiar with the fact that, IT security, cybersecurity, those have been a focus for, the last 20, 25 years, as you've moved from, paper to digital strategies and what that looks like. And then privacy came along, and now we're looking at, how we manage that more effectively. And it seems to be trending more and more, the more, of course, our personal information is embedded in a lot of these data systems. And even though the laws have existed, a lot of the laws that we look at were written at a time when data was existing in paper format. So now we're seeing a trend towards updates to a lot of privacy laws, both in the private and public sector, and I'll cover a little bit of that so we have an understanding of where things are trending towards, and how AI fits into the mix as well. So again, we don't want to look at any of these things in isolation. We want to look at them in a holistic perspective, understanding that, all of these are foundational pillars to your overall strategy. So you want to lead with your strategy, identify what your strategy is as an organization, and look how your program can actually help support that, so that you're not kind of chasing the next shiniest object, but you're actually being strategic in how you're applying it, and understanding that it's a maturity process over time. So it can often feel like we're falling behind, everyone else and their neighbor is doing something AI related. And so this presentation will hopefully give you a bit more structure around how to think about AI in terms of its application. So AI specifically is, for those that don't know, it's really, the short form is, it's an input of information where a computer is doing some processing. It's either learning from this behavior, or it's being told how to think through human inputs. And then the output is some decision or some output. So we break down, especially later on, I'll get into a little bit more around the concept of automation versus AI algorithm, into all the way now we're hearing the term agentic, or AI agents, and how those different ones apply. But really, we're looking at combining a large amount of data. You really need a large amount of data for that processing and learning and training to really be effective. And that's why these open AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini in the Google space, we're seeing that they're learning on basically any public data that's available, and they've been training on it. So they're able to create these, they're kind of like a jack of all trades. They know a lot about everything, but might not necessarily be, experts or PhDs in a certain area because they're going off of a general amount of data. And that processing is really an algorithm. So it's actually a mathematical function that a combination of data science and technology development goes into play to then create some guardrails or rules for the AI to function. And we can create a lot of like a kind of a narrow superhighway of what it needs to focus on, or these more generic AI tools have a broad stroke of function. And they leverage the technology called large language models and generative AI to help them function. So AI isn't new. It's existed for the concept of AI. The first tool called Enigma was created back in the 1950s with computation technology that when it started back then. What's changed is the ability to process data fast. And that's why we're seeing this huge upswing, is that there's been a lot of innovation around our processing power. We've gone from, I'm sure everyone on the call's experienced, the large desktop computers all the way down to now our tiny phones, and how much they can process is really truly incredible. And AI consumes a lot of power in order to do it. It requires a lot of resources and energy to run these processes at a technical level. So these servers that are producing this energy are running on the computation background, or the basically the chips that help run these algorithms. And now we're even seeing more and more technology and innovation in the last 5 years that's allowing us to have these servers literally in our house. Some people are setting up their own, like the cost to access these things is reducing. And that's basically the trend for any innovation. When we think of a camera, we used to have film that we would have to take in and be processed, and then we went to digital, and now we don't even really carry a digital camera anymore because now it's functioning on a device or a phone. So the same thing is happening for AI, and that trend is going to reduce costs, more efficiency, and greater computation power. So that's why we're seeing this rapid pace of development, and we're experiencing it the most because AI truly is transformational, and so we're feeling a little bit of that chasm. But ultimately, don't want to be a doomsday in terms of feeling left behind, because we're still in that infant stage of technology development. So even though the process is, at an enterprise level, there's a lot happening. Now, as kind of a democracy, we're moving across all different systems, and we're seeing it in municipalities as well, and how we can apply it. So there's a lot of value to get out of it. And by, even though it might be intimidating, starting the process now will help you move forward in a stepped approach, so that over time we're achieving those objectives that we've set out to do, and we're really gaining the most value over time. And you'll see that quickly if done right. So one more takeaway from this slide is really the concept of input and output. If you're inputting garbage, you're going to get garbage. So that goes from everything from prompting all the way to the data you're learning from. And so that's where data science and data governance really comes into play, and understanding what kind of the maturity and the functionality of the data sets that you have as an organization, and kind of what your current state is, so that you can understand what path to take and where you fit on that maturity scale. So going back to that house model, I want to get into a little bit about privacy, because the privacy really sets the tone when we're thinking about, using citizen data for drawing insights. Everything is all about, drawing insights from the data we have. And data means all types of data. It can mean, an administrative task. It can mean, things about individuals. So that's where we get into personal information, but it can also be, on a broader scope, any public data. So from that freedom of information request perspective, any interaction, anything we do at a public level, of course, as in a democracy, in terms of transparency and trust, we come to each other and request that of our public institutions to be able to be transparent about what they're doing with data and being able to access that information. So when we're looking at, privacy, we see this a lot in the news. Municipalities are getting targeted now by threat actors. They've kind of gone after the big enterprise. They've basically used up all of the resources, gained access to information. And what threat actors are doing is they're really trying to fund illicit activities that they're doing. So they're less interested in your data unless they can use it to scare you and blackmail you into paying a ransom. And so that's what we're seeing happening in terms of cyber attacks by external threat actors. But privacy breaches don't just happen by external threat actors. They also happen by internal threat actors, and sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally as well. The unintentional component can be related to, sorry, yes, you can. Thank you. So the privacy breaches that are happening in the news, it's often kind of an external enemy. But in terms of training and lifting up the knowledge base of everyone so that we're operating within guardrails is really the intent of privacy law and privacy management programs. And that includes things like policies to set those guardrails for acceptable use and help people understand how they should be interacting with information, and when people are not acting appropriately, what are the channels to report on that? If you're concerned about a colleague's use of personal information or how they're handling data, how do you manage that? We've seen in the news, it often happens in healthcare, but snooping. There might be a healthcare professional who was just curious, and they say curiosity killed the cat, and it's really the intent of a need to know principle. Did the person actually need to know that information for the purposes of carrying out their job function? And when they step outside of the bounds of those need to know, then that's where we get into trouble, because now we're breaching the privacy of an individual and we're not following those privacy principles as they're described in privacy law. So this slide is really just to paint the picture that governments are being attacked. And I'm sorry if any of you have experienced it, because I'm sure there have been some in, of course, in Manitoba as well. I've read some cases, so I know they can be distressing, and part of that is preparation and understanding what to do. And so I think we're all well aware that this is one of the threats that are out there. And there's a cacophony of privacy laws, so I won't get into a ton of detail about them today, but just wanted to touch on the highlighted sections related to Manitoba. So you've got your Healthcare Sector Act, you've got PIPEDA in the Canadian federal legislation that really speaks to how private sectors or anyone conducting commercial activity should handle personal information. And then we get into the public sector privacy legislation. And the public sector privacy legislation is a bit of a hybrid. It's got that freedom of information component, which is really kind of that openness and transparency for the purposes of democracy. But then we've got the privacy protection side. So that privacy protection side is what I'm talking about specifically, and the rules around it. There hasn't been a lot of attention, I'd say, in the last 20 years around that privacy protection component. But now we're seeing a trend towards a lot of provinces are starting to update their freedom of information laws. Some of them are actually dividing those freedom of information and privacy acts and making them two separate things, because they are really two separate beasts. But we're seeing it trend as a reaction to the digital space and the need to prescribe more detail around cybersecurity protection obligations, prescribing more detail around, what do we do about AI as a public institution? So I'll speak to that in a second. But what I also wanted to call out here is around the concept of PIPEDA, because as public municipalities, we deal with a lot of vendors, right? And those vendors are often private companies that have to comply with PIPEDA. So oftentimes a big risk for us is that vendor management and the oversight and accountability that we have of those vendors. For a lot of these cyber attack breaches, we're often seeing it happen at the point of vendors. There was some weakness in the system that allowed a threat actor to infiltrate that component. And so, but all private companies operating in Canada must at least comply with PIPEDA. If they're in other jurisdictions, there's other laws that do apply. But overall, Canada has been trying to update it. So Bill C-27 came out recently, and the federal government was trying to update PIPEDA to have two different acts. The Consumer Privacy Protection Act was trying to update how we handle personal information, how we handle consent, the accountability on businesses to ensure that they are handling information from a legitimate purpose perspective. So they're really trying to kind of raise the bar and meet that global standard that we're seeing in areas like California and the European Union. Then there's ADA, and ADA is an Artificial Intelligence and Data Protection Act that is more of that global sweeping, because artificial intelligence covers more than just personal information, but there are risks associated with artificial intelligence use. And so that act was aiming to set some guardrails around it. And Canada's been leading for some time around artificial intelligence management, but in terms of actually imposing or enacting a law, now we're kind of falling behind, because this bill has been on table twice now for two different turns of government, both a conservative and liberal. And that's as much as I'll say about federal politics right now, because I know we're in an election. But because Parliament prorogued in January, Bill C-27 kind of hit the deck. So it was really close to being enacted and reaching royal assent, and now we're kind of back to the drawing board. So now we're seeing provincial municipalities or provinces react and move their legislation forward in the absence of not having federal direction. So when we're interacting with vendors, we just want to be mindful that they're accountable, and they have a familiarity of the laws as well. And so there's no harm in placing these expectations around these 10 fair information principles. Everyone is accountable in some way, shape, or form to the data that they have, whether or not they're the collector or they're processing it on behalf of a public institution. But the data that's flowing in and out of these systems is ultimately the accountability of the municipality. So it's okay to put pressure on them and ask certain things of them and hold them to account, because they are just as familiar with these principles as you would be. Managing consent appropriately, identifying those purposes appropriately. So coming back to the idea of, do we actually know why we collect this data? What is the purpose behind this data? It's all about data minimization, limiting the collection, limiting the use, managing where this information is going, limiting the disclosure. When we receive freedom of information requests, we have to parse through the information, ensure that we're not exposing people's personal information unintended. So again, these principles come into play. The safeguards we put in place are those cybersecurity, technical, physical, administrative safeguards, things like our locked cabinets, locked alarm systems, as well as those IT and technical network protections like encryption, multi-factor authentication. All of these layers are part of the best practices around what our obligations are to protect that data. Then we get into a little bit of those data science principles. So the accuracy of that data is a bit of a shared responsibility, whether or not the citizens are responsible for the accuracy, or as a municipality, you're responsible for the accuracy. You want to ensure that that data you're using is proper. And it comes back to that input and output discussion. So the data that you have, you want to ensure that it's accurate, because the decisions you're making off of that data are dependent on the accuracy of that data. So again, these are one of those foundational principles that come to the fore when we're looking at artificial intelligence use as well. Openness is a big one. Trust. Trust has been, we've been losing trust in a lot of ways over time with different institutions. Unfortunately, there's been, a decline in public trust with government institutions for a variety of reasons. But one of those foundational ways that we can rebuild trust is through openness and transparency. And so the openness principle, which has existed for, well over 30 years, is something we can come back to think about. How are we communicating the measures that we're putting in place so that people can know that we're doing the right thing with their data? And so when we think about public communications, how are we telling people we're using their data? What are we doing to safeguard it? How can they challenge this? How can they come forward to our privacy officer or a privacy office and ask questions about what we're doing? And how do we, again, maintain that line of communication about what we're doing so that people understand that we are accountable and we're actually following through on what we say we're going to do? Then there's the individual access. So we talk about freedom of information request. That's more, public access to public information, but then there's the individual right to their own information. And we're seeing a little bit of a trend in AI laws. In Quebec recently, they updated their laws and they talked about the right to someone understanding what an organization is doing with their data in the processing of it. So I can actually, as an individual, if my personal information is being processed by a company in Quebec, and I don't like how they might be processing it or they're using it for AI, I can actually approach them and ask a lot of questions and actually say, hey, the decision you made out of that AI, you actually didn't have all the information to make the right diagnosis or decision. So let me provide you more updated and accurate information and run that algorithm again, and let's see what the output is. So that's really important when we think of high risk decisions, like, getting rated for insurance, or perhaps someone's payroll, or a hiring decision that we see in a lot of HR technology tools that are parsing resumes and different things like that. So there's a lot of, kind of complex processes that take place that we're seeing come out into laws that are allowing individuals to exercise their rights about how organizations are handling their data. But I want to get into a little bit more detail just to kind of give you a bit of a sense of the trend of what we're seeing. So I'll beetle over this. It's a lot of words on in the next few slides, but really we're seeing Alberta under Bill 46. It's coming into force in spring 2025. It's already achieved royal assent, and basically they've parsed the two in their Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Now they have an Access to Information Act and a Protection of Privacy Act. I mentioned Quebec already, and then in Ontario, Bill 194 is the Strengthening Cybersecurity and Building Trust in the Public Sector Act. Look at that word, building trust in the public sector. So really kind of coming down to the purpose of it. And this achieved royal assent. Some of it came into force in January, and some of it's coming into force in July. So we're seeing a lot of public sectors kind of hustle and bustle now to get compliant for July 1st. So we're seeing this trend among privacy commissioners and among public institutions and ministries to really, they're not raising the bar any higher than any of the best practices are, but they're updating acts and these acts so that they're meeting the best practice standard across all industry, so that it's not as a complex of a privacy landscape for vendors and public sector to navigate, as well as meeting that public expectation of what those laws are as well. So again, without getting into too much of the detail, we're starting to see some really strict penalties come into place because there's not a lot of teeth in privacy law. And so they're trying to find other ways to kind of get people motivated to actually do the work and follow through on what the law expects of them. So there's mandatory requirements in Alberta's Act around privacy management programs, the requirement for privacy impact assessments, as well as breach reporting to individuals, as well as to the commissioner or ombudsperson. And then there are some of these fines. So individuals can be held accountable, not just for loss of personal information, but also data and non-personal information, as well as to the organization. So again, we're seeing administrative monetary penalties getting used, and this can go into the factor of how we make choices around what we're resourcing. Once used to be maybe kind of, not top of mind, privacy concepts. Now it's becoming more and more top of mind, and we're actually investing in it and putting resources into it because we don't want to be, attacked with a number like a $750,000 fine for not complying. So, an investment of $40,000 or $50,000 doesn't seem so much when we're looking at the risk. Then in Ontario specifically, they get into a little bit more detail around artificial intelligence management. So in that Schedule 1 in the Enhancing Digital Security and Trust Act, they talk about cybersecurity. They talk about children's privacy as well. We recently saw this SchoolSoft breach that kind of happened across Canada where a lot of information was leaked and through a vendor, and then also artificial intelligence in Ontario as well. So the component of artificial intelligence is more as information is coming, but it's really setting the stage and the tone for the expectation around openness around AI use. So in Saskatchewan as well, the Privacy Commissioner has proposed some updates. As far as I'm aware, they haven't been drafted into a proposed legislative update. But these are, again, we're seeing the same trends and leaning on, things that already exist. So Ontario created a Trustworthy AI framework, and that's been used to communicate what the updates to Saskatchewan's Act should look like. So just to cap what the Trustworthy AI framework is, it's grounded in 3 strategic priorities from a public perspective. So that no AI should be in secret, that there's a clear understanding of how and when AI is going to be used in the public sector, that AI use is, AI is being used in a way that people in Ontario can trust it, that those risks are being clearly defined, there's a lot of openness and transparency, and that the effort is being put kind of upstream to prevent those risks from coming to fruition. And that AI is serving the people. So when we're thinking of the value add, we're also thinking of the social benefit to individuals as a result of these AI uses. Through this knowledge, Inc. has put together a bit of a privacy program management checklist just to help kind of sum up what is expected in particularly the Ontario law. But you can go to our website and you can find these resources, and they have some vendor risk assessment checklists, things related to AI and cybersecurity requirements, as well as a toolkit for public sector institutes about how to update your AI and your privacy management. And just to kind of relay the point, none of this can just be done and then shelved. Everything that we have to do needs to it's iterative. We need to assess it, know where we stand, create a plan, create a roadmap, set those guardrails, sustain it, evaluate it, and then when incidents occur, respond accordingly. So those first 3 components are really that proactive, preventative, upstream intervention. And then the 4th is really those response, like incident response management. And there's a lot of structures in place already for that, but now we have to think about what's happening when there's risks happening in AI as well. So getting into the AI element here, I did a little bit of an explanation around AI. Now I'm going to kind of tease that apart a little bit more. So generative AI or Gen AI is really creating new content. So it's a really cool thing where computers are actually generating something new. They're leveraging large language models. They're leveraging a lot of learning on large amounts of data, like art. We saw recently there's been trending like creating things in a certain art style. So they've basically become subject matter experts in certain art techniques, and now we're trying to mimic it. So generative AI is really a mimic, but it also is creating it in its own based on what it knows. So this is a lot of things that are fun to do for the creatives. I don't know if you've created an image through ChatGPT, but again, it's kind of assessing those things. There's a lot of intellectual property issues that come up as a result of this, and I won't get into that. But those, consulting with lawyers and understanding the IP implications of using things that are coming out of these tools is really important as well. Large language models is basically learning, language is really just a science. And so the science and the maths and the patterns and structures of language is what large language models have been learning on. So it's really just pattern recognition. And the largest models have been trained on English, French, or Chinese. They can translate things as well, and they actually translate English to French really well as well. So I think that's a great resource to kind of, if you need to translate a web page or a public facing communication material, if you're already bilingual but you just want to save yourself some time, a large language model is a really good way to plug in your product and ask for it to translate it for you, and then you can do the briefing and the screening to make sure that it's actually accurate. Agentic AI is really what we're hearing trending, and agentic AI is really getting into that deep thinking, and it's kind of creating a black box. So it's this void where we don't know exactly what it's doing, but we've told it what we want it to accomplish, and then we're kind of letting it do its thing. And so agentic AI is kind of setting something, it's kind of setting it and forgetting it, but putting a human in the mix to train it over time. So some of the uses of agentic AI we're seeing today is where, we're in chatbots for any kind of e-commerce website where we've got a whole knowledge base of policies and practices and, terms and conditions of an organization. And so it's interacting with a citizen who has a bunch of questions, and it can actually answer it based off of the resources that it has available to it and interact with a certain tone and basically do things that humans would do, and then we would obviously iterate on it. The risks associated with something like this, we've seen in the news recently, is that this AI can hallucinate. It can, because it wants to please, it wants to get to that output, it might actually make stuff up and bring out outputs that aren't true to the knowledge base that it's working from. And sometimes we don't know how it gets there. So that's why having a human in the loop and audit processes and correction of these algorithms is really key. And I'll get to a bit more of that in a minute. But I want to get to kind of, I mentioned before, we're seeing this trending around AI over the last 10 years, really. There's been a bit of a boom. And now we're seeing the predictive reasoning has boomed since just, in 2020. And now it's kind of in our face no matter where we go. And and we call it artificial intelligence because it's scoring. There's a Turing test that basically scores the computer against a human being's functioning. So once it passes that threshold, it kind of reaches artificial intelligence. Before that, it's just, computational science. But then once it's reached that point, then really using the term artificial intelligence is where it's appropriate. I got into the trust deficit a little bit earlier, and this is just kind of there was a poll in the US around people's trust in AI. And in fact, their trust is increasing over time. And I think we've all felt that as well, because we're becoming more and more aware of the risks. And I've shared a lot of those with you today. But some of the main public concerns that came out of a Federal Trade Commission survey were specific risks that we know exist. So, hallucinations that I mentioned before with large language models, and ensuring that we're doing our due diligence and, not trusting it at face value. We have to understand that AI can hallucinate, just like people can lie, our facts can be wrong, not necessarily maliciously, but sometimes we have to fact check, and it's the same with AI. There's a lot of unknown unknowns. This is a burgeoning field. There's a lot of applications and things. So oftentimes technologies are kind of over promised and under delivered in the early stages, but there is a lot of value that we'll get over time. So as we're thoughtful in these approaches and evaluating those risks will start to play out more and more. And as we do those risk assessments collectively at a global level, we'll start to answer those unknowns. Some of the other concerns are around job loss. And really, we're not at a stage where there's a lot of job loss happening. It's really tied to looking at AI as basically, the term co-pilot. It's really kind of your friend, something to kind of spitball ideas with, and move that creative process forward a little bit more, particularly in these open AI systems. There is an environmental impact, as I mentioned before, with devices and the servers, computing power that's necessary. And of course, that causes greenhouse gases. So there's a lot of people that are trying to solve that and ensuring that there's as much of a zero footprint with AI as possible. And then industry concentration, state overreach being, state, obviously US, but thinking about, governments embedding this and monitoring us and it becoming a bit of a big brother situation. So there's concern around that as well. Disinformation, we're seeing it, oftentimes we see disinformation on social media, and AI is just exponentially allows us to produce stuff that's believable and that can be, put out there. So again, that openness and transparency of when something has been produced by AI goes a long way in terms of building that trust framework around how people interact with it and ensuring that it's not just hidden all the time. Safety and security, of course, there's a lot of data to manage. when you're prompting AI, you can actually surface material that's in its knowledge base. So that's why we don't want to put personal information into OpenAI systems, because threat actors can actually surface personal information. So I'm not using ChatGPT to put in my symptoms or like do my taxes or anything like that, because someone out there can probably pull it up again. And so there's knowledge around how to manage that appropriately. Mentioned the black box problem. There's a lot of unknowns and how these computing factors are happening. So the explainability is a term that's come up with AI, and how we can explain the process and understand the math that's going into producing that process. And then ethical concerns and bias. We've seen, just as humans are biased, the data that we use can be biased, and we want to ensure that AI is not being used for unethical purposes. And we're already seeing laws like that exist in the European Union as well. And we already have human ethics laws that, still apply in the concept of AI. And our Charter of Rights and Freedoms applies to that as well. And the instability of it, it's in flux, right? Just like, when we think of crypto and, just different kind of technologies that are out there, and the instability of these markets, that's something that we are considering, as well as AI. But AI is really here to stay. It's got its foothold, and so understanding how to navigate that is key. I'm seeing time. I've got so much more to get through, so I'll beetle along, but I hope this foundation is helping. So just a few more headlines around AI systems as seen in the headlines. We've seen this all, I'm sure. DeepSeek has been banned in some countries as a result of DeepSeek not following privacy law. So coming back to privacy law, TikTok was fined 345 million euros by Ireland's Data Protection Authority over children's data privacy. The algorithms it was feeding wasn't considering the requirement for sensitive data about children, and so they've been fined accordingly. So we're seeing in these organizations the lack of due diligence of law, and the speed at which they want to innovate and operate and then go to market with these things is causing them to break the law. So we want to learn from these mistakes and understand that the law still applies, and we need to be thoughtful and preventative, and manage that risk accordingly. What you may find when you come up to managing these laws is that privacy and AI kind of butt heads sometimes, because yes, there's some complementary things like the security elements, that there's design and default, individual rights apply, impact assessments. We need to train people about them. There's kind of converging themes that we can apply our current knowledge or our current skill set to manage AI in the AI governance realm. But then there's also new elements like the concept of data democratization, intellectual property, as I mentioned before, the data that's generated, the governance around the computation or the output, and all of the knowledge that goes into that from a technical perspective. And AI needs a ton of data. And I just talked earlier about data minimization from a privacy perspective. So how are we to do both? And again, being thoughtful around the data sets that we currently have, and coming up with those secondary uses or those quality improvement initiatives or efficiencies are some of those ways that we can do it thoughtfully and use the data for specific purposes that the public would already expect us to be using it for. So we've covered a bit of this, but traditionally we think about privacy, we think about safety and robustness, validity and reliability of our systems and the data we're using. Then we're creeping into these new areas like the bias and non-discrimination, the explainability and transparency, hallucinations and the unintended consequences. And then now we're seeing new laws come out in order to manage some of these things and the gaps that the new risks that we're identifying. But we're also seeing existing frameworks that we can already apply the use of AI. The Canada Consumer Product Safety Act, the Bank Act, Canadian Human Rights Act, the Criminal Code, Food and Drug Act, and the Motor Vehicle Safety Act. So there's already laws in place that that wrap their arms around AI as well as the privacy laws. So we're not operating in a vacuum. There's elements of our due diligence and our best practices that need to be applied for AI use. Again, we've produced a tool through Inc. It's an AI compliance checklist for public sector entities, and there's 6 themes, I'll just pull up this QR code. If you want to pull out your phones, you can scan this on your camera and it'll pull up a link to our website where you can actually download this resource. And I'll come back to it in a second again, but I'll go to the first page again here, just talking about, identifying AI systems in use or planned for use, preparing for compliance requirements, monitoring for upcoming regulations, implementing AI governance practices, preparing for increased oversight, and staying informed about related developments. So this is a bit of a checklist to guide what some things to think about. I'm just going to spend a couple more minutes just drilling into some of those next steps as well. So where do we get started on AI governance? So AI governance, you should have at least an AI policy in place, basically an AI acceptable use policy. That's your first guardrail. People need to understand what we need to do to protect the data. What can we do and can't we do with the data that we use? Simple things like high-risk systems, we can't use them for certain purposes. Of course, Inc. offers this service, and we can stand this up for you very easily. And putting together a risk committee, getting a compilation of people either internally or leveraging other resources to put together a risk committee to help to start to evaluate vendors if they're going to offer you AI tools, working with those that are experts in this space. There's universities and colleges where you've got computer science majors, there's researchers, there's innovators. And so definitely don't go at it alone. If you don't have the in-house expertise, there's definitely people that you can partner with, both from a technical perspective as well as from the innovative and the data science area as well. Train your staff, help them understand, have them watch this webinar if you want, or we can put together a more tailored program that helps with understanding the context of AI and the use for your organization, and speak to what those AI policy requirements are. And then put in place ongoing monitoring, reporting, that openness, disclosure for AI, marketing of AI uses, and the technical testing of AI systems. There's, again, a lot of foundational components that can start to be stood up just to start to put those guardrails in place from a governance perspective. But now when we're thinking about actually implementing it, when is it appropriate for us to use it? So we talked about artificial intelligence and that threshold. Automation, as we know, has existed for a long time. We've had robots doing automatic functions for us. We think of assembly lines and different things like that. And so automation is really setting up those systems in place. So this screenshot here has been adopted from an individual that I found recently who does a good job of basically explaining the breakdown. So the way to read this table is I've got each column of dual column coming down. So decision-making and human involvement are one aspect. Data structure and adaptability is another, and then reliability and risk tolerance is another. And then when we look at the rows, we look at automation, AI workflow, and an AI agent. So this table is supposed to help you evaluate your current state, see where you fit in each of these columns and these topics, and look at what might be the more appropriate use case for you. So you might not need AI yet. You might actually be more, automation might make more sense for you. And so when you're evaluating your current state, you want to have this in mind, that AI isn't necessarily the outcome, and it might not be your most value add, because of course there's costs associated with AI. The AI has to run in the background all the time. We can either pay for open AI systems through calls. So those API calls, we pay for those. Like if you're paying for a subscription for any of the open AI systems, you might see that you can only do it 200 times a month because they're restricting your use for that reason, because it costs a lot of computing power. Or if you don't want to use the OpenAI systems and you buy a license and use it on your own servers to protect that data, then the algorithms you set up are running constantly. So you're paying for that 24/7 use of your systems, because that's how AI runs consistently. So there's elements to think about there in terms of your AI strategy as well. But this is really to think about your risk tolerance, the data structure that you have in place already. Do you have the resources to have high touch? Do you have the expertise to have humans involved in the AI use case? Or are you more likely to want to build something that's a bit of a set and forget, and you have specific parameters. And this is those, if this, then that, and kind of those Excel functions of the true and false statements, and kind of being a very narrow scope. So it might solve a specific automation task, but it's very effective and adds a ton of value for you. So this is just one of those things. I know we're running out of time, so I won't go too much more into detail, but there's a ton of value that you can gain out of this slide. A few other additional steps to consider for AI implementation: engage the community. Ask them what their thoughts are about it. What is their risk tolerance? Where do they trend on that trust factor? What are their pain points in interacting with the public sector? Is there something of value that you can do for them, as well as in terms of your internal administrative processes? Again, explore partnerships, look at local academic research institutions, attend career fairs and tech ecosystems. There's a ton of talent out there, a ton of talent. Everywhere I go, whenever I'm speaking anywhere, I get approached by people saying, like, I have this background in computer science. I can't find a job. What can I do? I'll volunteer. There's people literally willing to give their knowledge for free right now. So get out there, get connected in the ecosystem. I'm sure you can find resources and knowledge and leverage the knowledge of others that have taken the time to train on this stuff. Case studies and best practices. Think about your success stories, speak to one another, engage other municipalities, and explore what's working for others. There's an organization called Health Cities, not paid by them. I just know someone who runs it, and this is based out of Alberta, and they help cities think about from a health perspective, but looking at their data and their management and how to draw insights and make informed decisions. And they're really leveraging a lot of cool tools that help with that data collection. And then think about your challenges faced, as I mentioned before. What are the things that you're trying to solve? So assess your current processes, evaluate the feasibility of it, and look at it from a risk management perspective. And then, of course, give it a try. Find a safe way that you can pilot and monitor and improve. And if it didn't work, oh well, you learned from that mistake and move on and try something else. So don't be afraid to do low touch, low risk projects that aren't going to break the bank or cause harm to individuals if they aren't performing correctly. So that's part of your risk management and risk assessment from both a privacy, a security, and an AI perspective. I'll pause there. I did want to do a bit of a trial and talk about how to prompt AI systems. So I know that there's been some stuff come up in the chat, so I'll just pause and kind of do a bit of a gut check and see where we're at.
Yeah, we had Diane McCoy. She had asked if there has been any cases in Manitoba where fines have occurred due to breach of privacy.
Oh, great question. I don't know off the top of my head, because I don't believe there are financial penalties associated with non-compliance to the fair information one, but I could be wrong. So forgive me if I am wrong. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I can definitely follow up. Yeah.
I've got a second question here that would be from Sherilyn. Would you be able to supply an AI policy example or a template, something I saw you kind of shared a bit of a review or a checklist?
Yeah, we offer, as part of our services, we can produce a policy for you. I do have, in some other presentations, I've gone through basically what the table of contents should cover. So I'm happy to share that table of contents as well, for people to kind of evaluate. Yeah.
Now, just a question between Eric and myself here. We've come up with a few questions. I know our audience probably has questions, and please share them in the chat or unmute yourself and bring those questions forward, because it's always interesting to learn what others are using right now presently. Are they using the free version? Are they using a paid version? Just interesting to find out what our group is thinking or what they've used in the past. But some real examples where we lack AI safety protocols led to unintended consequences. Is there things that you've come across? Have you, is there any best practices for us on first steps?
Yeah, just thinking of the unintended consequences. So, these open and generative tools, again, if they're not within your system, if you haven't talked to your IT network, we're internally, like at Inc., we're evaluating Copilot for our internal use with our client documents. We haven't done that to date. We haven't set that feature on. We just use kind of the open source one for kind of, again, these generative, like help me create an outline for a presentation, for example. But in terms of actually, leveraging the data we have internally and using AI for that, we've developed automation tools that are, in-house developed to help with some processes around risk assessment, and are very light touch. But if you're going to be using a tool, you want to ensure that you're not think about any public data. So if you're not comfortable or you're not allowed to, shout it from the rooftops, then it likely shouldn't be being entered into a prompt in your system. If you can de-identify information, you can be generic if you want to iterate on a document, but there's obviously a level of due diligence so that you're not accidentally breaching that. If you have become aware that you've, perhaps done it, by mistake, definitely reach out to your team. Hopefully, gone are the days of punitive measures and more about learning and responding and ensuring that gaps are closed. So if you're not sure, other people probably aren't sure as well, and it might even be a blind spot for, your risks department that they're not communicating what those guardrails should be. So I would encourage, foster communication internally around what to do and what not to do. And and like I said, in the absence of not knowing, ask who's responsible for putting together an AI policy and get the ball rolling on that at least, for sure.
Thanks, Kaitlyn. Kaitlyn, maybe I'll ask you to close your presentation and we'll see if we get any more questions from the floor.
I have a question, actually. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go to this one slide that people can also do this AI and privacy readiness quiz. Another QR code. You can go to the website there. I'll also share, you've got my email there as well, but I'll sit on this slide so people can do that while your question's coming up.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So I do utilize more open AI, and I for my daily life, but I also use it for some of my tasks municipally. One thing that we've worked with some other communities and one developer most recently who is utilizing for minute taking, and I know that you can do this with the ones that I have, but because it's open AI and it's a little more generic, I don't typically utilize that. But they brought up Otter and that it's, they swear by it for minute taking. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions to, make meetings more efficient when it comes to minute taking and that kind of stuff, and what it retains, how long it retains it, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. I assume that most municipalities are probably using like a Microsoft 365 instance. If they're using like Google, whatever your kind of system is. Like Zoom, for example, I saw a question come up that, AI does transcription, or pardon me, Zoom does transcription. Teams does that also. We had to enable the transcription feature. So short answer is I would suggest using the tools that you already have in place. And then second, every tool that you do use, especially if it's going to involve personal information like our voice prints, our biometrics, that should be going through your vendor risk assessment. So whatever process you have associated with that from a privacy and security perspective, just as though you were going to, launch a new software, there should be a questionnaire that you're going through. And we have a resource on our website that helps with vendor procurement. I think it's a vendor procurement for not-for-profits, but related to AI. So it would be something you could definitely leverage. And there's a ton of value. Like what we definitely can use them. If you're using it for more of like an internal planning meeting and you're not talking about citizens in the, individual, but more kind of plural and open-ended conversations that you could have, a meeting in a coffee shop and not be concerned about what was being heard. Then any resource is fine. But when you're thinking about new tools, you want to think about what's adapting into your current workflow and your current network as well. So I think the transcription in the Teams has been working great for me personally. There's an AI feature where it actually summarizes, it creates action items, and then of course you read through it and you validate. So I still take written notes. because my brain doesn't retain a lot of information. So I'll still take my written notes in the meeting. And then I'll use those written notes to validate the output of what the transcription is. So I'm not taking ad verbatim, but I at least have something that roots me in the facts, so that when I am evaluating what the action item was, that it's not making something up. So that's kind of the recommendation I would have. But ultimately, you want to evaluate your tools from a privacy and security perspective, especially these kind of more simple administrative tools that are out there in the market.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that answer.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I've got Diane McCoy with her hand up, and then I've got a question in the chat. Diane, go ahead.
Thanks. Great information here. Wow, this is an area that seems so gray. You've shed some light on a few things today. My question is probably simple, but it's made me question my practices, and including using Zoom. Like today, when we signed on Zoom, we had to consent to the recording. So I don't remember ever setting any boundaries. You talked about boundaries in one of your questionnaires for what I'm going to do with the data or anything like that with Zoom. Should I have? I just don't know.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, a lot of those features aren't really enabled yet. So there's not a lot of, guardrail setting, especially when a meeting's been set by a different entity. So if you're joining as a participant, you're kind of at the mercy of either I participate or I don't, right? If there's something like that going on. So of course you can, opt to stay off camera, opt not to speak. Or you can, if it's a smaller meeting, you can kindly suggest, like, actually, I'm not comfortable with you transcribing this call. Please, it would be the person who set up the meeting and the conversation with them about your consent management. But there are, if you're looking at your full IT network, there are privacy features that sometimes are off by default. And if you work with your IT network provider, who might be the one, like the admin responsible for setting those, you can definitely explore what that looks like for tools that you use internally. And oftentimes, unfortunately, a lot of privacy features and different enterprise products are through a paywall. And so in order to be more privacy protective, you sometimes have to upgrade your license, which is really unfortunate. I wish it was privacy by default. Some laws do require privacy by default, like in the European Union, but it's not super enforced yet in a lot of our technology that we see today.
Well, we do in the business I'm in, we do group training and meetings and things like that. So we have cautioned people in the past if they don't want their image on camera, because if we record it, and if they don't want their name, just put their initials or figure out some way that they're not, breaching any personal privacy issues. So, this is very helpful, and it makes me think of some, practices that we need to sort of come to be helpful. Thanks.
Definitely. Yeah, of course. And everyone values their privacy at a different spectrum, right? So, what some person is like an open book and never worries about it, others might be. And so considering that for your staff and, taking an approach of, I think Canadians do a really good job of finding that kind of pragmatic middle of function and privacy, and they don't have to be in conflict with one another. So, but yeah, just as with any kind of, corporate culture and respect of individuals' rights, that privacy is one of those rights as well, to an extent. Some, our work product is not, the laws don't really apply to like me being here, on behalf of my organization. I'm not, this isn't my personal information. This is a work product. So the law doesn't really apply. And that's, I'm getting too much in the weeds of it because it's contextual, but those are definitely some things to consider.
Great. We have one question here in chat, and it's from Uriel. It says, we made a survey. We cannot ask AI to analyze the responses if there is personal data of the people answering. If we remove the personal information, then we ask AI to analyze the answers. Is this the right way? How do you see it?
Yeah, I understand kind of the purpose of that question. I don't want to give a blanket statement because everything's so contextual, right? I don't know what what's in that survey or anything like that. But I will say that de-identifying and pseudonymizing or anonymizing or, removing identifiers, there's a bit of a data science associated with that. And so the concept of someone being identifiable is what we have to evaluate. So someone can still be identifiable even if you remove their first and last name from a data set. So just because we do, remove certain data elements, we think it's, no longer personal information, but there's a bit of a complex assessment that goes into play there. So you just want to be careful that way.
One more question. Chatbot for our webpage is helpful, or this is one of the situations where we are at risk of the chat box starting inventing answers instead of guiding people to the already available information on our website.
Yeah,
So
I've seen some companies, what they do is the chatbot has to produce a web page in their answer that it shows to the individual guides them to that resource on your knowledge base. So that you do have that accountability so that it can't hallucinate. So there are, in the design of your chatbot, there are ways that you can mitigate or reduce those hallucinations. In the absence of some of those risk management pieces, just simple QA on, you can pull up your quality, these answers and, parse through them and see if they are actually producing the right information and develop a cadence around that QA process or quality assurance process and you'll get insights that way. But there are people that are designing these systems to help mitigate some of these risks that you mentioned.
great. Okay, thank you so much, Kaitlyn. That was such great information. And we just want to follow up with one more quick quiz for those of you still on board with us here. Alma's going to share that up right away. And there's our post poll after learning about AI application in municipal governance and how do you envision AI transforming your local government's operation in the short and long term. Now, I know we've got a variety of guests on here, but I hopefully you're able to use some of the information we received today. And our second question is, what key takeaways from today's webinar will guide your municipality in initiating or advancing AI to improve community services and economic development? And please consider that question as a business as well, or an organization. And I just wanted to remind everybody, we have another webinar coming up on May 15th, and it's tackling the childcare challenges. And we learn about Carberry's approach to resolve that. We also have coming up our case study launches. We'll have one on the 21st in Dauphin, best practices on Vermilion growers and the Northgate Trail. We will also have a connection zone in Dauphin on the 22nd, and we'll have one in Killarney on the 26th, and one in Stonewall on the 27th, and one May 28th in Taché. Our guests at those events will be Manitoba Transportation and Infrastructure, Manitoba Hydro, and Manitoba Water Services Board. And I think everybody really got a lot of good information from you today, Kaitlyn, and thank you very much for joining us and sharing.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It looks like everyone, wants to take steps and they want to do it right. So thanks for joining the call. And like I said, I'm available if you have more questions along the way, and good luck to those that are looking to apply these insights.
Yeah, and we put your information in our chat box, and we'll also send out information to everyone who attended. Thanks to all. Have a good day.